This is a powerful story that offers many lessons about a woman in her late 50s, a high-powered executive at a major corporation, who finds herself unexpectedly pregnant before marriage with a U.S. Army Special Forces soldier in his 20s. They bravely navigate societal judgment and personal conflicts. Before watching the video, please subscribe and hit the like button. It truly helps support our channel. Leaving behind decades of intense dedication, Elizabeth Vance had reached the age of 58. As a senior vice president at one of America's leading multinational corporations, she possessed a level of success and status few could easily challenge. When she entered the sleek corporate offices in downtown Chicago, employees would offer respectful nods, and in the boardroom, her decisive words could instantly command the room's attention. Her increasingly seasoned business acumen, along with her solidly built network of influential contacts, proved she was one of the few key figures driving the company's global strategy. However, at some point, Elizabeth began asking herself, "People say I have the life others dream of, so why do I constantly feel this gnawing emptiness?" She dimly sensed that the years spent alone after her divorce, childless and solely immersed in her demanding career, had stretched on for too long. To soothe her hollow heart, she sometimes tried comforting herself by booking reservations at Michelin-starred restaurants, but it only momentarily filled the void with exquisite food. The fundamental ache remained unquenched. It felt like driving a luxury sedan down an endless highway, growing weary because the destination was never in sight. It was around early summer when a unique directive landed on her desk: spearhead a cooperative project with a U.S. Army Special Forces unit under the Department of Defense, DoD. A government initiative had emerged, requiring the company to explore integrating cutting-edge military technology into a long-stalled international expansion project. The global strategy team leaders had attempted initial meetings with military liaisons, but progress stalled due to complex hurdles involving strict security protocols and proprietary corporate information. Ultimately, the company's executive committee concluded that SVP Vance should personally take charge and lead the negotiations. While Elizabeth found this task somewhat disruptive to her existing priorities, a familiar sense of challenge welled up inside. She knew collaborating with the military, particularly special operations, wouldn't be straightforward, but she was also keenly aware that the more difficult the task, the more she could demonstrate her value as a problem solver and further solidify her standing within the corporation. This sense of responsibility and ambition put her back into a focused, determined mode. "All right, let's tackle this. If I deliver results here, no one will question my capabilities," she resolved. A few days later, the first meeting with the military representative was held in the company's main executive conference room. After being informed that the liaison officer dispatched from the U.S. Army Special Operations Command would arrive shortly, Elizabeth took her seat at the head of the polished mahogany table. When he hadn't appeared after 30 minutes, she felt a flicker of impatience, considering it unprofessional. Just then, the heavy conference room door opened quietly, and a young man with an unexpectedly fresh face entered. His lean, athletic build was evident even under the crisp Army combat uniform, ACU, yet his expression held a discernible mix of tension and keen anticipation. "My apologies, ma'am. The traffic downtown was brutal," the young man said, standing straight but without excessive formality. Only then did Elizabeth seriously question if this person was truly the designated Special Forces officer. He looked far too young. She had pictured a seasoned major or lieutenant colonel, perhaps in his late 30s or 40s, but this man's face still held the unmistakable energy of youth. As he sat down and introduced himself, his voice was clear and confident. "My name is Michael Carter, Captain, U.S. Army Special Forces. I've been assigned as the primary liaison for this joint technology initiative." His youthfulness suggested he was likely in his late 20s, certainly not yet 30. Furthermore, his brief, courteous nod wasn't the rigid formality she might have expected, but carried a degree of approachability. Elizabeth observed Captain Carter with a gaze filled with mixed thoughts. A Special Forces captain this young? Accelerated promotion for exceptional performance, perhaps, the thought crossed her mind, but she maintained a professional smile and returned the greeting. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Captain Carter. I'm Elizabeth Vance, SVP overseeing this project from our end. I look forward to working with you. Their first meeting that day proceeded in a somewhat reserved, professional atmosphere. However, Michael Carter calmly presented the initial briefing materials and security requirement outlines, displaying an unexpectedly sharp, logical approach. Accepting the briefing packet, Elizabeth thought to herself, he's young, but clearly sharp. I shouldn't underestimate him. He's come prepared with solid points. After the first meeting, Elizabeth felt a strange sense of curiosity. Even after returning to her office, Captain Carter's focused expression lingered in her mind, and his clear voice echoed slightly. At first glance, he might resemble a bright, ambitious junior associate, but the inherent authority conveyed by his uniform and rank created a unique and compelling presence. This is nonsensical. Why am I giving a second thought to this young soldier? Get your head in the game, Elizabeth, she mentally scolded herself, shaking her head slightly. The project's success was paramount, personal distractions were an unaffordable luxury. However, as joint planning meetings between the corporation and the military team became more frequent, she and Michael Carter inevitably crossed paths often. Situations requiring secure document exchanges were common, and Elizabeth had to personally engage in navigating the military's stringent data security protocols. Inevitably, moments arose when the two were left alone to finalize details or troubleshoot issues. Gradually, they began to learn small things about each other. Snippets emerged about how Michael had always been athletically inclined, attended West Point, excelled, and earned his Green Beret through the rigorous Special Forces qualification course, leading to commendations and relatively swift advancement. Elizabeth rationalized these brief exchanges to herself as necessary rapport building for effective project collaboration. Michael, too, felt an unexpected warmth and intellectual engagement from Elizabeth during their interactions. Though her corporate demeanor was polished and direct, there was an undeniable undercurrent of sharp wit and thoughtful consideration in her approach. One evening, long after most employees had departed the downtown skyscraper, leaving only pools of light from scattered offices, Elizabeth pressed her temples, staring at complex projection charts. This analysis is taking far longer than anticipated. The board subcommittee expects a full strategic overview by the morning meeting. At her words, Michael, who had stayed late reviewing security compliance documents, pulled a nearby chair closer to her side of the conference table. "Ma'am, let me help where I can. If any of this involves cross-referencing the operational parameters we discussed, I can handle that section." With looming deadlines and no other immediate option, Elizabeth thanked him and handed over a segment of the data analysis. It was early summer, and the large office, with the main climate control scaled back for the night, felt warm. Wiping a bead of perspiration from their brows, the two worked in focused silence, wrestling with the complex information. "Looks like we're genuinely pulling an all-nighter," Elizabeth murmured, glancing at the clock. It was already nearing 11 p.m. Then, by chance, their eyes met across the table strewn with papers. Michael offered a slight, tired smile. "Ms. Vance, seeing your dedication firsthand is truly impressive." Elizabeth gave a wry smile. "It becomes the norm after decades climbing the corporate ladder. I've been on this track since my 20s, now, frankly, I get restless if I'm not working like this." After speaking, she realized it sounded like an unguarded admission of her own life's imbalance. Hearing her words, Michael hesitated before asking carefully, "If I may be candid, Ms. Vance, you're obviously incredibly accomplished, but you seem kind of lonely." At his words, Elizabeth felt her breath catch. This young Special Forces captain had voiced something so direct, something colleagues would never dare articulate. Strangely, she felt neither offense nor defensiveness. Instead, it felt as though a deeply buried chord within her had been struck. "That might be true," she conceded quietly. "Honestly, I can't deny it. But isn't everyone a little bit lonely, deep down?" "Yeah. I guess I think about that sometimes too." A peculiar silence settled between them. In the heavy air of the late-night office, they briefly studied each other's expressions. Elizabeth felt as though she were nearing some unspoken boundary, yet the subtle risk of it strangely made her pulse quicken. After finally organizing the materials around dawn, they were finished. Elizabeth asked Michael, "Do you have a car parked nearby to get back to, wherever you're staying?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I took the L train in. I'll just grab the first one running, or maybe a cab." Elizabeth briefly considered, then offered, "It's no trouble, I can give you a lift." "Where are you headed?" He gave an address for temporary military housing near a suburban base. By then, the pre-dawn sky over Lake Michigan was dimly brightening, though the city streets below remained largely shadowed. Inside the quiet luxury of her car, Michael gazed out at the awakening city. Chicago never really sleeps, does it? It's demanding in the army too, different pressures, but living in a place with this constant energy, it must take a toll. Elizabeth glanced at his profile from behind the steering wheel. Intense, yet revealing a thoughtful side. "I can't begin to imagine the demands of Special Forces life. I'm just trying to keep my own corner of the world running. Still, thank you for your help tonight. You really saved me hours." He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Happy to assist, Ms. Vance. Honestly, I learned quite a bit observing your process." Although aware of the subtle flicker of mutual interest in their glances, neither crossed the clear professional and institutional boundaries separating the corporation and the military. However, a series of unforeseen events soon unfolded, drawing them deeper into collaboration. A sudden geopolitical shift caused a delay in a planned overseas training deployment for Michael's unit, simultaneously creating complications with the international partner designated for the technology transfer. This tangled the project schedule and necessitated urgent, high-level coordination with Elizabeth's company. In the ensuing scramble, Michael and Elizabeth were assigned to travel together to Europe to salvage the deal. As the departure date for Geneva approached, Elizabeth felt the familiar pressure of internal corporate politics. Some VPs on her level seemed wary of her high-profile assignment, and whispers circulated about her dominating the potentially lucrative international project. However, the CEO, her direct superior, firmly backed her, stating, "Elizabeth is our best negotiator. I trust her to resolve this successfully." Ultimately, she couldn't depart with a completely carefree attitude, but she firmed her resolve with the singular goal: successfully landing this agreement will solidify my position beyond dispute. The overseas trip took them to Geneva, Switzerland, for a critical technology and security summit. Assigned rooms in the same hotel near the conference center, Elizabeth and Michael spent their days in intense, separate meetings with corporate partners and military attachés, respectively. In the evenings, they would convene over dinner in the hotel restaurant to compare notes and strategize for the next day. When their official schedules permitted a brief respite, they sometimes took short walks through the unfamiliar, elegant streets bordering Lake Geneva. Walking through quiet lanes lined with historic buildings under the twilight sky, Elizabeth faintly recalled her own study abroad experience decades earlier. "I spent a semester in France when I was young, but back then, everything felt daunting and new. To think I'm back in Europe now, negotiating multi-million-dollar tech deals, time certainly changes things." Michael matched her pace quietly beside her. "I've deployed to several countries, ma'am, but this is the first time I've had a chance to just walk around a foreign city like this. It feels different. If it weren't for this assignment, I'd probably just be stuck reviewing intel reports in my room." For a fleeting moment, the time flowing between them felt incredibly calm, as if they existed in a private bubble, far removed from corporate pressures and military protocols. However, on the last day of the summit, an unexpected crisis erupted. The preliminary Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, they thought was secured was suddenly jeopardized. The international partner company's legal team abruptly notified them they would withhold final sign-off unless explicit, legally binding guarantees regarding intellectual property rights related to the military tech were provided immediately, guarantees that required complex coordination back with DoD legal. Panicked, Elizabeth and Michael realized they had to spend the entire night drafting revised clauses and securing remote approvals, needing to submit the final package by sunrise Geneva time. Once again, an urgent, pressure-filled night descended upon them. In the small business center of their hotel, they frantically revised documents, translating complex legal and technical jargon on the fly. As dawn approached, Elizabeth's mind felt frayed from exhaustion and stress, and Michael showed the telltale signs of fatigue familiar from long, arduous field exercises. Elizabeth suggested they take a 5-minute break, stepping away to get bottled water, while Michael stood by the window, gazing out at the dark, still city. Unconsciously, he felt his heart begin to race. No matter how I frame this feels like more than just a project collaboration, he admitted to himself. The sense of partnership, the intellectual spark, and the strange flutter of excitement he felt when working closely with her were entirely new territory. Returning with the water, Elizabeth caught her reflection in the darkened windowpane and let out a nearly silent, self-deprecating sigh. Good Lord, why is my heart pounding like I just ran a marathon? She thought she had walled off her emotions effectively after her divorce years ago, but an unfamiliar warmth, a disconcerting flicker of attraction, spread through her. Feeling this towards a man nearly 30 years her junior felt both wildly inappropriate and strangely exhilarating. Yet, a faint, rebellious whisper echoed in a corner of her mind, "You only live once, Elizabeth. Isn't this the kind of unexpected turn life sometimes takes?" As the revised documents finally neared completion, Michael, perhaps hesitant to simply part ways and return to their separate rooms, cautiously spoke up. "You've worked incredibly hard, Ms. Vance. Maybe, just a quick walk outside? Get some fresh air before the sun comes up?" It was well past 2 a.m., but after only a moment's hesitation, Elizabeth nodded. "Why not? When else will we be working through the night in Geneva?" They walked along a quiet, cobblestone side street near the hotel. The path was deserted. Deep in the lane, a single, ornate gas lamp cast a soft, golden glow. Elizabeth suddenly stopped walking and silently looked up at the sliver of night sky visible between the buildings. Michael also stopped beside her, sharing the profound quiet. Thousands of unspoken words hung in the air between them, but he couldn't yet find the right ones. Then, Michael quietly broke the stillness. "Ms. Vance." "Elizabeth, may I call you Elizabeth?" That simple request, shifting from formal title to first name, shattered the professional barrier. Elizabeth turned to him, surprised. He, who had always maintained perfect military decorum. Addressing her as Ms. Vance or ma'am, was asking for this simple intimacy. She couldn't possibly mistake the implication. In that instant, Elizabeth's heart hammered against her ribs. "Go ahead, Michael," she managed, her voice slightly unsteady despite her effort to sound casual. "At this hour, I doubt protocol matters much." Michael took a tentative step closer. "Elizabeth, honestly, I started worrying that once this project ends, I wouldn't have another chance to say this. The age difference is significant, I know, and I'm still active duty, saying this might be completely out of line, but I can't help it. I'm developing feelings for you." At his direct, vulnerable confession, Elizabeth closed her eyes briefly. The world seemed to fall utterly silent, as if only the two of them existed on that narrow Geneva street. Though their acquaintance had been relatively brief, she rapidly reflected on the unexpected connection she'd felt. The carefully constructed walls around her heart, untouched for decades as she focused solely on her career, it was undeniably true that they had begun to lower, just slightly, for this intense, intelligent young soldier. And now, at this moment, as he laid bare his honest feelings, she no longer possessed the strength, or perhaps the desire, to maintain her defenses. "Michael," she began, her voice low but clear, "we both know this situation is complicated. But, if I'm being completely honest with myself, I felt drawn to you too. And frankly, it scares me. I don't know what we should do." Michael nodded slowly, his gaze serious. "The time we might have isn't guaranteed. The Army has my next deployment cycle tentatively scheduled, and I know your company expects this project to conclude soon. Still, I don't want to just walk away from this." Listening to him, Elizabeth acutely remembered her age, 58. It wasn't that she felt her life was ending, but society certainly dictated it was a time for slowing down, for reflection, not for embarking on a potentially tumultuous relationship with a man young enough to be her son. Yet, was it truly wrong for her heart to feel this alive again? Conflicting voices warred within her, but ultimately, she met his earnest gaze and replied softly, "Thank you, Michael. Your honesty, it's compelling." That night, they didn't kiss, but they stood close for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Though they knew pursuing this connection was fraught with risks, the pull of that shared warmth was undeniable. The cool pre-dawn air felt crisp against their skin, but the emotions simmering between them were intensely warm. The thought, "I wish this moment could last forever," flickered through both their minds. Upon returning stateside, Elizabeth immediately felt the weight of corporate reality descend again. Project wrap-up reports demanded her attention, and she noticed some executive colleagues observing her with renewed, perhaps envious or critical, scrutiny. Subtle comments reached her ears, whispers about her age, "Isn't she past her prime for these high-stress roles?" or complaints painting her leadership on the Geneva trip as overly assertive, despite the successful outcome. However, the salvaged international agreement was undeniably a win, leading to positive feedback from the CEO and the board. But Elizabeth found she no longer cared as intensely about the internal politics or her colleagues' opinions as she once had. The unfamiliar, burgeoning feeling stirred by Michael Carter felt far more significant. Michael's situation back at his duty station, Fort Liberty, North Carolina, was also complex. The military bureaucracy was already processing his upcoming deployment orders for an operation in the Middle East. His role as liaison for the corporate project was officially temporary. The time for his full return to his operational unit was imminent. Despite the geographical distance and looming separation, he made time to call Elizabeth, and they began to communicate discreetly, outside of official channels. When possible, he'd make the long drive for a quick weekend visit, meeting her at inconspicuous restaurants outside the city or taking quiet walks in less trafficked parks. The couple, separated by nearly 3 decades, tried to navigate their budding relationship away from prying eyes, desperately clinging to the unexpected connection they didn't want to extinguish. One day, amidst this period of tentative hope and logistical challenges, Elizabeth experienced a sudden wave of nausea and dizziness while at her desk. At first, she dismissed it as stress or perhaps something she ate, but the episodes became more frequent, prompting her to schedule a checkup with her doctor. And then, she received the utterly unbelievable diagnosis: she was pregnant. The doctor, initially perplexed, remarked that pregnancy at her age was exceptionally rare and recommended follow-up tests to confirm. However, the subsequent results were unequivocal. Elizabeth silently stared at the lab report printout. Impossible, she thought, stunned. Me, pregnant, at 58? On the drive home from the clinic, gripping the steering wheel of her car, she felt completely adrift and pulled over onto the shoulder of the expressway, unable to process the news. A maelstrom of thoughts overwhelmed her. Could she actually carry this baby to term? Wouldn't the risks be enormous at her age? How would Michael, a dedicated soldier in his late 20s with a demanding career and deployments ahead, react to this life-altering reality? Overwhelmed by shock and uncertainty, tears streamed down her face. Finally, composing herself enough to drive, Elizabeth called Michael later that evening, her voice tight with emotion, saying she had something incredibly important to discuss and needed to see him as soon as possible. He managed to get weekend leave and drove up immediately. They met late that Saturday night in a quiet, dimly lit booth at a suburban diner miles from the city center. Michael took Elizabeth's visibly trembling hand across the Formica tabletop and asked gently, "Elizabeth, what's wrong? You sound..." Taking a deep breath, she spoke, keeping her voice as steady as she could. "Michael. I'm pregnant." At her words, Michael's expression morphed through a rapid succession of emotions: utter shock, disbelief, a flicker of fear, then dawning realization and something akin to awe. "Pregnant? Really? We're having a baby? I don't understand, how?" Elizabeth lowered her gaze to their joined hands. "I was shocked too. My doctor basically called it a 1 in a million chance, a biological miracle. But, Michael, I don't know if having this child is the right decision." I'm terrified of the health risks, of what people will say, and you have your career, your deployments. Michael fell silent for a long moment, his grip tightening on her hand. Then, looking directly into her eyes, his voice filled with unwavering resolve, he said, Elizabeth, whatever the challenges, whatever the risks. I want this. I want you, and I want our child. I will take responsibility. I absolutely do not want to lose either of you. Overcome with a tumultuous mix of fear and relief, they held each other tightly in the vinyl booth, tears blurring their vision. Despite the daunting obstacles of societal judgment, their significant age difference, the inflexible demands of the military, and the high-stakes corporate world, their shared determination to protect this unexpected life began to solidify. However, reality proved relentless. When whispers of Elizabeth's pregnancy inevitably reached the executive suites at her company, perhaps through HR channels related to medical appointments, some colleagues reacted with disbelief and derision. An unmarried SVP? Pregnant? And the father is some young army guy she met on that project? Has she lost her mind? Snide remarks and judgmental gossip circulated behind closed doors. Elizabeth's superiors expressed deep concern, subtly pressuring her by mentioning the potential impact on the company's image and suggesting that navigating motherhood and her demanding role might be untenable. Concerns about her health due to a geriatric pregnancy were voiced, along with negative speculation about her fitness to continue leading high-pressure initiatives. The situation within the military structure was equally harsh. When the news of Michael's involvement in an unexpected, premarital pregnancy with a much older civilian executive surfaced just as his deployment orders were being finalized, his commanding officer reprimanded him sternly. Captain Carter. You're a decorated Special Forces officer. What the hell were you thinking, getting involved in this kind of situation? Especially now? With an older civilian executive, no less. Are you seriously considering marrying her? When Michael replied firmly, Yes, sir. I intend to marry her, his commander shook his head in disbelief. Are you serious, Carter? Do you have any idea what you're getting into? The career implications alone, not to mention that age gap. Michael, however, stood his ground respectfully but firmly. Yes, sir. My decision is made. Despite the barrage of opposition and criticism from nearly every quarter, the couple's resolve held firm. Michael, facing immense pressure, flew home to Texas to tell his parents. They were utterly shocked and deeply concerned. Married? Now? Michael, you're about to deploy. And she's a corporate executive who's 58. Son, you need to think rationally. But Michael was resolute. We have a child on the way. I'm taking responsibility because I want to, and because I love her. I hope you can eventually understand, but even if you can't right now, this is the path I'm choosing. Elizabeth, having few close family members, confided in her younger sister, Sarah, who lived in California. Sarah was initially stunned into silence. Liz. A baby? Now? This is. And the father, he's younger than my oldest son, she stammered. However, seeing Elizabeth's quiet determination, Sarah's shock eventually gave way to tearful support. Okay, Liz. Just, please take care of yourself. Whatever you need, if I can help, I will. Ultimately, pushing through the external disapproval, Elizabeth and Michael went to the courthouse and obtained a marriage license, officially becoming husband and wife. This news caused further ripples of consternation both at her company and within his military command. The corporation began applying implicit pressure, suggesting that managing parental leave and potential health complications might necessitate her stepping down from her SVP role for her own well-being. The military informed Michael that while they couldn't prevent his marriage, his deployment schedule was firm, he would ship out as ordered, regardless of his new marital status or impending fatherhood. Meanwhile, Elizabeth, continuing to work long hours despite her pregnancy, began to experience more pronounced physical effects from fatigue and stress. Her doctor reiterated the warnings: conceiving at her age was extraordinary, but the risks were substantial, and she absolutely had to avoid overexertion. One tense afternoon, while leading a critical budget presentation in the main boardroom, Elizabeth suddenly turned pale, gasped, and collapsed, clutching her abdomen. Panic ensued. 911 was called immediately. Michael received an urgent Red Cross message during a pre-deployment field training exercise and, after frantic arrangements, rushed north on the first available flight, arriving at the Chicago hospital hours later, still in his fatigues. "Doctor. My wife. Elizabeth, and the baby, are they okay?" The attending physician explained with a grave expression. "Due to her age and the sudden event, there's significant risk of placental abruption or severe hemorrhage. We've stabilized her for now, but she needs immediate hospitalization and absolute bed rest. Honestly, Captain, the next few weeks are critical. We have to be very careful, or we risk losing the baby." At those words, Michael felt a chilling fear grip him, the world narrowing to the sterile hospital corridor. The terrifying thought, "Are we going to lose everything?" washed over him. Elizabeth regained consciousness in a quiet hospital room hours later. The plain white ceiling tiles swam into view, and beside her sat Michael, his face etched with exhaustion and worry. As she weakly tried to form words, Michael quickly took her hand. "Shoo, Elizabeth. It's okay. Please don't talk, just rest." Elizabeth managed to whisper, her voice raspy, "I'm so sorry, Michael. I'm afraid. I'm ruining your life with all this." Michael shook his head vehemently, his voice thick with emotion as he replied, "Don't you dare say that. For you, and for our child, I would give up anything, my career, what people think, all of it. So please, never, ever say you've ruined anything." For the following month, Elizabeth remained hospitalized on strict bed rest. At the corporation, while discussions about her long-term replacement began circulating more openly, a faction of senior colleagues who respected her long tenure and contributions pushed back. "How can we sideline Elizabeth so coldly after everything she's built for this company?" Ultimately, a compromise was reached. She would be placed on extended medical leave, with her future role to be determined upon her recovery. Michael obtained emergency leave from the Army, extending it as much as possible, and stayed steadfastly by her bedside, coordinating with doctors and offering quiet support. Though his superiors questioned the length of his absence with disapproving communications, Michael ignored the pressure, filtering out everything except the immediate needs of his wife and unborn child. His sole mission now was their survival and well-being. Time crawled by, and Elizabeth's pregnancy, against considerable odds, progressed towards the final weeks. Her doctors, considering her age, the previous scare, and the overall high-risk nature of the pregnancy, strongly recommended a planned cesarean section for the safety of both mother and child. Prioritizing the baby's safe arrival above all else, Michael and Elizabeth agreed. On the scheduled day, Elizabeth entered the sterile operating room with a heart full of nervous anticipation, receiving the spinal anesthesia, while Michael waited anxiously in the designated family area outside, clad in surgical scrubs. It was, perhaps, a more profoundly nerve-wracking moment than any combat operation he had ever prepared for. Time seemed to stretch infinitely until, finally, the unmistakable sound of a baby's lusty cry echoed from the operating room. A nurse soon appeared, beaming. "Congratulations, Captain. You have a very healthy baby boy." Hearing those words, Michael sank onto a nearby bench, overwhelmed, burying his face in his hands as tears of profound relief and gratitude streamed down his face. A short while later, Elizabeth, still emerging from the fog of anesthesia, was wheeled into the recovery room. Michael was allowed in briefly and was able to gently place their swaddled newborn son in her arms. Small, red-faced, and crying vigorously, the infant was tangible proof of their unlikely miracle. Even through her blurred vision, as her son's tiny form came into focus, tears welled up and flowed freely down Elizabeth's cheeks. I actually did it," she whispered, her voice thick with indescribable emotion. "I'm really a mother. At my age." The period that followed remained challenging. Elizabeth required significant recovery time in the hospital, and the baby underwent thorough monitoring in the neonatal unit due to the high-risk circumstances of his birth. Michael's extended leave was nearing its end, forcing his return to Fort Liberty to prepare for his imminent deployment, but he managed to secure a few precious extra days. During this brief window, having already gotten their marriage license, they held an impromptu, tiny wedding ceremony in the non-denominational chapel located within the hospital complex. The bride, radiant but still weak, sat in a wheelchair. The groom, in his dress uniform, was acutely aware he had to report back to his unit almost immediately. It looked unconventional, perhaps even makeshift, but few wedding ceremonies could have been imbued with more raw sincerity or hard-won joy. Only Elizabeth's sister, Sarah, who had flown in, and two of Michael's close army buddies who drove up from North Carolina, were present as witnesses. They held each other's hands tightly and exchanged simple, heartfelt vows. "We promise to face whatever comes, together. We will protect each other and dedicate ourselves to our child." The scene, the young, decorated soldier and the accomplished, mature bride, defied every societal norm. Yet, the small chapel was filled with tears and profound emotion. Sarah later remarked she'd never seen her pragmatic older sister look so vulnerable yet so fiercely happy. Michael's friends clapped him on the back, whispering they'd never seen their tough captain look so completely content. And nestled carefully in the bride's arms, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, the newborn baby, oblivious to the world he'd just entered, slept peacefully, tiny lips pursed, as if silently blessing the extraordinary union of his parents. After the brief ceremony, Michael could no longer postpone the inevitable. His deployment orders were firm. The Army, while acknowledging his unique family situation, could only offer standard protocols. The mission took precedence. Elizabeth, still recovering, even bravely spoke of trying to follow him to a support base overseas, but the military firmly dismissed the idea as logistically impossible and inappropriate. Needing reliable help to care for the baby once she was discharged, Elizabeth gratefully accepted her sister Sarah's offer to stay for an extended period, supplemented by assistance from a couple of trusted longtime friends. The corporation finalized Elizabeth's departure, framing it as a mutually agreed-upon retirement due to her new family priorities. Signing the separation agreement one day, she did so with a surprising sense of peace, stating clearly to the HR representative, "It's time for me to forge a new path. I achieved more than I ever imagined in my career here, and now, I have something infinitely more precious waiting for me at home." Time unfolded. Elizabeth slowly regained her strength, pouring her energy into caring for their infant son, navigating the steep learning curve of late-in-life motherhood. Michael deployed to a volatile region overseas, enduring the separation with stoic professionalism while staying in constant communication whenever possible. Elizabeth lived for his brief satellite calls and emails, marking off the days until his return. He completed his tour safely, without physical injury, and his return home was met with another tearful, joyous reunion. Afterward, they settled into a modest rented apartment in a quiet suburb, far from the demanding pace of Elizabeth's former life, carefully, cautiously building their new family reality. Societal prejudice and judgmental stares hadn't vanished entirely. Neighbors sometimes whispered, old colleagues occasionally made awkward inquiries. But they had already weathered far greater storms together. As they posed for a family photo one afternoon, Elizabeth holding their now toddler son, she thought with quiet conviction, "Perhaps my real life is only just beginning now. Whatever anyone else thinks, this little boy and the man who loves us are my entire world." Michael, too, understood their family didn't fit any conventional mold, but he firmly believed their bond, forged in adversity and sealed by an unexpected miracle, represented a love more genuine and resilient than most. Others might never comprehend their choices. Some might dismiss their story as improbable or even foolish. Others might look upon their unconventional family with thinly veiled scorn. But to Elizabeth and Michael, who had together navigated corporate pressure, military rigidity, a high-risk pregnancy, and the very real fear of loss, the background noise of societal opinion no longer held much power. The world's judgment seemed insignificant compared to the profound miracle of their son and the unwavering strength of their commitment. Elizabeth still wakes early, but now it's to the sounds of her young son stirring. She prepares breakfast, helps Michael get ready for his day. He now holds a less demanding training position at a nearby reserve base. This seemingly ordinary domestic scene is layered with the memory of countless tears shed, battles fought, and resolutions made. Before leaving, Michael hugs his wife and scoops up their son, his voice full of cheerful energy. "Have a great day, you too. Stay safe, don't wear yourselves out. Love you." Elizabeth smiles warmly, her eyes reflecting deep contentment, and replies, "We love you too. Thank you. Our boy, and you're both my miracles." They had faced the impossible and created a miracle together, and that miracle had irrevocably reshaped their lives. And within the fabric of that transformed life, a new, quieter, but deeply meaningful story continued to unfold each day. The path they had chosen, defying age, expectation, and convention, walking steadfastly towards each other, was anything but misspent. Perhaps it was, in fact, a testament to the extraordinary synergy possible when the wisdom earned through decades of experience meets the unwavering passion and courage of youth. Thus, the turbulent, improbable journey of the late 50s executive and the 20-something Special Forces soldier, from a chance meeting to unexpected pregnancy, marriage, childbirth, and the triumphant navigation of immense challenges, leads not to a conclusion, but to a rich, ongoing beginning. Beside them, having weathered the storms of prejudice and doubt, stand only the bright, curious eyes of their precious child and two hearts filled with enduring trust, profound gratitude, and an unconventional, unshakable love. Thank you for watching today. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below.